Listen close. You think you know who the bad guys are. You see the leather, the cuts, the patches on the back of a motorcycle club like the Bandidos MC, and your mind immediately draws a line. Outlaws, trouble, the villains in the story. They're the ones riding on the wrong side of the tracks, dealing with things the rest of us try not to think about. That's the reputation, that's the legend. But sometimes, the line between black and white, between the outlaw and the hero, is just a suggestion. And sometimes, the toughest men in the whole state, the ones everyone fears, are the only ones with the courage to do what's right. This isn't about guns or rivalries or the open road. This is about a piece of paper, a desperate little boy, and the moment a notorious motorcycle club chose to be the guardians of the innocent. It started in the most mundane of places, a grocery store on the outskirts of Phoenix, Arizona, a Tuesday afternoon. Not the kind of place where legends are born or wars are fought, but that's where an unsuspecting cashier, a young woman named Sarah, found it, tucked deep inside an empty cereal box, crumpled, almost missed, was a folded piece of notebook paper. Sarah was just doing her job, cleaning up the stray returns when she saw it. She was about to toss the box when she felt the weight of the paper inside. When she pulled it out and smoothed it open, the handwriting was shaky, clearly belonging to a child. The message was chillingly simple. It read, "Please help me. He checks my room at night. I can't tell anyone. I'm scared." And then, an address, handwritten in the bottom corner of the note. Sarah's blood ran cold. She knew instantly that this wasn't some kid's prank. The fear was palpable in the jagged lines of the penmanship. She wanted to call the police, of course. That's the first instinct. But what if calling the police made things worse? What if the man who wrote the note was watching her, or worse, watching the address? She needed help that could move fast, operate outside the system's bureaucracy, and maybe, just maybe, intimidate a situation into submission. She thought about it for a frantic 10 minutes, standing in the back aisle, clutching the note. She needed muscle. She needed immediate, undeniable presence. And in that part of the state, that meant one thing: the Bandidos MC. Now, you might ask why. Why the bikers? Why not the law? Sarah's cousin, Mike, was a known associate of the club, not a patched member, but he ran a repair shop that did business with them regularly. She knew they were fiercely loyal, and she knew they protected what they considered their own. More importantly, she knew their reputation was so terrifying that one of them simply showing up could change the dynamic of any tense situation. This was a Hail Mary pass. She took a deep breath, snapped a quick photo of the note, and sent it to Mike with a simple text: "Urgent. Get this to the chapter president." The message landed on the phone of Hammer, the president of the local Bandidos MC chapter. Hammer is a legend, a mountain of a man with a beard that looked like it could stop a bullet and eyes that missed absolutely nothing. He was in the middle of a meeting at the clubhouse, the kind of meeting that usually involves loud voices, engine grease, and strategies that don't involve saving children from troubled homes. He checked his phone, saw the photo of the note, and the whole atmosphere in the room changed. Everything stopped. The usual roar of the club went silent. Hammer didn't need to read the note aloud. He simply projected the image onto the wall from his phone. Every patched member in that room saw the same desperate plea from a child who felt entirely alone. There was a moment of heavy silence. These men, who had faced down rival gangs, done hard time, and lived a life on the razor's edge, were now confronted with a situation where the only thing they could fight was pure, ugly helplessness. It was an insult to their code. See, despite the outlaw label, almost every one of these men had a daughter, a son, a niece, or a little brother they fiercely protected. They understood the concept of family, even if their family was built on two wheels and the brotherhood of the patch. An attack on a child, on the innocent, was a violation of an unspoken, sacred rule. Whisper, the chapter's sergeant-at-arms, a man whose movements were as quick as his temper, was the first to speak. His voice was rough, low. "That address. We verify it. Now." Hammer nodded once. No discussion was needed. No votes were cast. The decision was made the moment the note was read. A small child was asking for help. and the most feared men in the city were now the only ones who knew. It didn't matter if it was dangerous, if it was going to draw heat from the cops, or if it put their operations at risk. When a child is in trouble, the code of the road demands intervention. They were going to ride. The target wasn't a rival club, it wasn't a score. It was a small house on a quiet suburban street. The bikes started roaring, and the mission of the Bandidos MC changed from running the streets to protecting a single terrified boy. They weren't riding for glory. They were riding for a lifeline. They were riding to answer a whispered prayer. This was no longer just a club. They were a rescue operation, fueled by gasoline and a primal, shared sense of justice. They would find out exactly what was happening in that house, and they would make sure that little boy was safe. The silence was broken only by the thunder of their engines. The address from the note led the small convoy of Bandidos MC to a deceptively quiet cul-de-sac in a middle-class neighborhood, miles away from their usual territory. This wasn't a rundown block. It was manicured lawns and two-car garages. It was the kind of place where trouble is supposed to stay hidden behind closed doors. Hammer, Whisper, and 4 other seasoned members, Grizz, a quiet giant, and Skull, the club's resident tech guy, parked their bikes a few houses down. They weren't trying to be subtle. Their presence was the statement. But they needed intelligence before making a move that could spook the situation, or worse, endanger the child. They split into 2 teams. Grizz and Skull approached from the back alley, using the shadows and fences, while Hammer and Whisper walked up the street, looking like the most dangerous census takers you'd ever see. Skull, with his unexpected background in surveillance, quickly accessed the available public records for the address. The house belonged to a man named Gerald, recently divorced, living with his 10-year-old son, Timmy. Gerald was listed as working 2 jobs, a logistics manager during the day and security guard at night. On paper, everything looked normal, too normal. It didn't match the desperation in the child's handwriting. As Skull scanned the neighborhood, he noticed something crucial. The house had a sophisticated home security system, but it was set up strangely. The cameras covered the front door, the back door, and the living room windows. But there were no cameras aimed at the child's second-floor bedroom window, or even the hallway leading to it, a calculated blind spot. Meanwhile, Hammer and Whisper were approaching the front of the house. Hammer noticed a small, slightly rusted bicycle chained to a post in the front yard. It looked well used, but the chain was locked with a heavy-duty padlock, even though the yard was fully fenced. "A kid who can't even leave his own bike unlocked," Hammer muttered, the sound gravelly. "Something's not right, Whisper." They rang the bell. The door opened slowly, and Gerald stood there. He was mid-40s, clean-cut, and wore a nervous, practiced smile. He looked exactly like the kind of person who blends perfectly into the background, the kind of person you'd never suspect. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" Gerald asked, trying to project a casual authority that didn't quite reach his eyes. His gaze flickered nervously over their leather cuts and the patches that screamed, "Bandidos MC." Hammer didn't waste time on pleasantries. His presence was enough to fill the doorway. "We're looking for a kid. Timmy, your son." Gerald's smile faltered. "Timmy? He's fine. He's in his room doing homework. Who are you people? You need to leave. I'll call the police." Whisper stepped closer, his posture radiating coiled tension. "You do that, Gerald. But before you dial, maybe you should consider why a kid who is fine felt the need to hide a note begging for help in a box of Fruit Loops miles from here." The color drained from Gerald's face. The mention of the note, the specific, secret details, shattered his facade. His denial was immediate and aggressive. "That's insane. You're trespassing. He's just a boy with an overactive imagination. Get off my property." He tried to slam the door, but Hammer's massive boot was already in the frame. At that moment, Skull's voice crackled over the small, concealed radio earpiece. "Hammer, I got something. The kid's room. It looks like the lock on the inside of his door has been reversed. It now locks from the outside." This confirmed their worst fears. The subtle, chilling detail meant the child was not just scared, he was trapped. Hammer ignored Gerald's increasingly frantic demands. He shoved the door inward, forcing Gerald back. The initial plan of intimidate and leave was over. This was a rescue mission now. "Timmy!" Hammer roared, his voice shaking the quiet house. "We're here to help you! The men with the bikes!" Gerald lunged at Hammer, not with strength, but with panicked desperation. Whisper easily intercepted him, locking the man's arms in an iron grip. "You listen to me, Gerald. You're done. The note, the lock. You just bought yourself a ticket to hell." Hammer ignored the struggle and headed straight for the stairs. He found the door to Timmy's room. It was indeed secured with a deadbolt from the hallway side. He took a single step back, raised his boot, and delivered a powerful, bone-jarring kick right next to the lock. The door frame splintered with a deafening crack, and the door flew open. Inside, Timmy was huddled in the far corner of his room, his face tear-streaked, clutching a worn teddy bear. He looked up, expecting to see Gerald, but instead saw a towering man in a leather vest with a fierce, protective expression. "It's okay, son," Hammer said, his voice dropping to a gentle rumble that surprised even Whisper. "We're the Bandidos. We got your note. You're safe now." Timmy didn't hesitate. He scrambled across the floor and threw his arms around Hammer's waist, burying his face in the leather cut. The child didn't need an explanation. The moment he saw the door kick down and the towering figures of the outlaw bikers, he knew his plea had been answered. Grizz and the others entered the house through the back, securing Gerald, who was now sobbing hysterically and claiming misunderstanding. The scene was set. The child was safe in the arms of the bad guy, and the apparent good guy was subdued, exposed as the predator. The Bandidos MC had navigated a situation the police would have needed search warrants and bureaucracy to handle, acting on nothing more than a child's desperate scribble and their own fierce code of protection. But the standoff wasn't over. Now they faced the crucial dilemma. How do they handle the aftermath without becoming the villains in the eyes of the law? They had the boy and they had the truth, but they were a group of outlaws standing in a suburban living room with a man tied up and a door kicked in. The next steps would define the entire operation. They had saved the child, but now they had to save the situation, which required a level of calculated risk only they could manage. The sound of a distant siren started to drift in from the street. Someone, likely a nosy neighbor, had finally called the police. The clock was ticking. The sound of the distant siren grew louder, a piercing reminder that the Bandidos MC were now operating on borrowed time and enemy territory. They had the boy, they had the predator, but the arrival of the police meant their carefully orchestrated rescue could quickly become a major arrest for every patched member present. Hammer, still holding the trembling Timmy close, knew they couldn't simply vanish. That would leave the boy alone and return Gerald to his house, free to lie and manipulate the legal system. They had to control the narrative, and they had to do it fast. Whisper, always thinking 3 steps ahead, went to the kitchen and grabbed a pen and a large white piece of paper. He wrote a brief, unambiguous message in huge block letters, careful to avoid touching anything else in the house. The note simply read, "Child safe, note found, evidence in cereal box, call CPS." He slapped the note onto the refrigerator door, making sure it was the first thing the arriving officers would see. This wasn't an admission of guilt. It was a clear signpost directing law enforcement to the real problem. Grizz, meanwhile, quickly untied Gerald, but made sure the man knew the consequences of resistance. "You move, you run, you speak anything but the truth, and we will find you. You understand? This is about the kid, not us. We are simply the messengers." Gerald, utterly broken by the sudden, terrifying intervention, only nodded, slumping onto the sofa. The fear of the Bandidos MC was far more immediate and persuasive than the threat of a jail sentence. Hammer took Timmy outside, shielding him from the view of the house. He knelt down, his massive frame an incongruous sight next to the tiny, terrified boy. "Timmy," he said, his voice softer than the growl of his engine, "the police are coming. They are here to help you. You have to tell them everything. Show them where you wrote that note. Tell them exactly why you were scared. Can you do that for me?" Timmy looked up at the fierce, tattooed face, not seeing a monster, but the first person who had ever truly answered his cry for help. "Yes, sir," he whispered. Hammer gave him a genuine, rare smile. "Good boy. Now, your note was strong, Timmy. It was the strongest thing in this whole town today. Never forget that." Just as the first police cruiser rounded the corner, lights flashing but siren now silent, the 6 Bandidos MC members mounted their machines. They didn't speed off. That would look suspicious. Instead, they started their engines, a collective deafening roar, and rode slowly, deliberately, straight past the arriving officers. The officers, shocked by the sight of the notorious club calmly leaving the scene of a disturbance, momentarily froze. They saw the house, the splintered doorframe, and the 6 menacing figures riding away. Before they could react, Whisper leaned back and shouted 2 words that cut through the engine noise. "Check the fridge!" The officers hesitated for a moment, then, following protocol, they secured the perimeter and entered the house. They found the distraught Gerald, the broken door, and the note on the refrigerator. Within minutes, they found the crumpled original note still inside the cereal box, just as the Bandidos promised. The simple evidence spoke volumes, confirming the child's distress and the necessity of the extreme intervention. They also found the reversed lock on Timmy's door, which was the irrefutable proof of confinement and abuse. The immediate investigation focused on Gerald and the welfare of the child, exactly as Hammer had intended. Child Protective Services, CPS, was called, and Timmy was taken into emergency protective custody that evening. Gerald was arrested on multiple charges, including child endangerment and physical abuse, his carefully constructed life collapsing around him. The Bandidos MC never received recognition. They didn't want it. They rode back to the clubhouse, not as heroes on the news, but as a brotherhood that had fulfilled its own stringent code of justice. They kept their names out of the official report, and the police, sensing the complexity and the positive outcome of the situation, quietly decided not to press charges for B&E or property damage, choosing instead to focus on the actual crime against the boy. They simply logged it as a domestic disturbance, resolved. Days later, Sarah, the brave cashier, received a mysterious discreet envelope at her store. Inside, there was a handwritten note from Hammer. It was short and to the point. The note worked. "Kid is safe. The debt is paid. Stay safe." Tucked inside was also a significant amount of cash, more than enough to cover the damage to Gerald's door. The Bandidos MC settled all debts, even the ones they incurred saving a child. This is the kind of story that doesn't make the evening news. It's the story of the blurred lines, the truth that the most feared men can possess the deepest compassion. They are not saints, and they will never be called heroes in the daylight. But when a child needed a lifeline, when the system was too slow and too blind to see a desperate scribble, the Bandidos MC rode in. They proved that sometimes the true definition of a protector isn't about the uniform you wear, but the fierce, uncompromising code you live by. They are outlaws, yes, but they are also guardians, answering the silent prayers of the vulnerable, one desperate ride at a time. The boy is safe, and the Bandidos ride on, their reputation still dark, but their ledger suddenly, surprisingly, clean.